Hey guys, it's Steve here from CG Geek with a new exciting Blender tutorial. This tutorial is going to be creating Hollywood green screen effects all within Blender. We're going to be using a B-roll shot from Avengers Infinity War, and we're going to be compositing it completely in Blender, using some tracking, using some chroma keying, and using some masking, all using Blender's powerful tools to create some really great looking results. But before we jump into it, I'd like to thank iHapper for sponsoring this video. The iHapper USB-C hub features HDMI 4K output from your PC or laptop, 3 USB 3 ports with Type-C power delivery, and an SD and microSD card reader. It's all the ports you need in a compact and durable design. Check them out with the link below. Okay, so starting off in Blender, the first thing you want to do is punch in the settings for the footage you're going to be using. I'm using just 1080p footage at 23.9 or 29.97 FPS, but if you're curious on how to find what your settings are exactly, all you have to do is bring up the footage you're using and then right click on it and go Properties, and then under Details you can see right here we have the frame width, height, and the FPS. And if you want to use the footage I'm using, this is just a shot from the Avengers B-roll footage that I pulled off YouTube that has our favorite Guardians in it and works well. If you want to use that, there's going to be links in the description for the footage, the backplate, and some other stuff. So you can go ahead and download that. But now we're going to go ahead and open up that footage. So I'm going to start by going to the compositor. I'm going to choose Use Nodes and Backdrop. We can drop this down a little bit and make this a little bit bigger, and we can also hit N on our keyboard to close off the properties there. So I'm going to delete the rendered layers as we're working purely in compositing for the most part. So I'm going to delete the render layer by hitting X and then Shift A and add in a movie clip. We're going to go ahead and open up that movie clip we just took a look at. And we can go ahead and go Control Shift click to put in a viewer node. And you can see our Guardians in the background here. I'm going to hit Alt V to zoom in and V to zoom out. So I'm going to hit V a few times just to zoom out. And then middle mouse wheel will move the footage around. So here we see we have a green screen, and then we have some pieces of the set kind of visible in the background here. So that's going to have to be masked out. But first, let's get our gradient set up for our green screen. So if you're using, say, a color screen, which I'm going to use as kind of our base mask. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in a matte color key. And if you just plugged in your image here, and then chose a green image by grabbing our eyedropper here and picking like a relatively middle of the road green color, you'll see if I go Control Shift, look at this, that we're not cutting out too much. We're just cutting out pretty much that color, and we can change our hue and our saturation to make that a little bit better, but it's not going to get the shadows and the highlights like we want. So to do that, what we're going to actually do is we're going to create what they call a keying screen. A keying screen allows you to take a color and kind of make a gradient of it by tracking the background, and will find the shadows, and this will allow you to get a much more accurate key by having a variable color here instead of just a solid color as your key color. So this is something I actually just learned, and it's really cool, so I'm going to show you how to do it real quick. I'm going to jump over to our motion tracking tab. We'll grab our footage right here. It's already in the cache here because it's in Blender. So if I scrub through the timeline here now, you can see that we only have about 32 frames of footage here to work with. So I'm just going to change my endpoint in the timeline to be 32, so we don't have all that wasted space. And now I can scroll in here, and we can start placing some trackers. So the trackers are going to tell Blender what areas of the green screen are the different shades of green, basically. So it knows to kind of generate a gradient and use that as the keying color. So to do this, I'm going to first create a new object. I'm going to call this green screen over here. This is just so we don't mess up the camera track in case you had to track your camera as well. In this case, it is pretty still, so we're not going to bother doing any tracking. And on frame 1, I'm just going to hold Control, and I'm going to start placing trackers. Now, I'm not going to be placing trackers to actually track, because in this case, I just need a still gradient because there's no shadows changing in the background. But if you had shadows, say, moving over your green screen halfway through the footage, and you wanted to track that to kind of make it, because you can animate this gradient, then you might want to track these trackers through the whole footage. In this case, I'm just putting them all in frame 1, and I'm not going to bother tracking them. So to place the tracker, I'm just going to hold Control and click. And I'm just going to place these around my character, making sure they never go where the character goes, so they're always outside of the character's motion. And I'm just going to continue placing these around in the different shades of green. So we can cover some of the darker green in the shadows over here, I can get one right in between her arms there to show that there's a shadow back there and some down here. And just to kind of cover all the different colors of green to make it so we have a nice gradient of what this green screen actually looks like. So there's a pretty good amount, and we should be able to work with that. If I scrub through here just to make sure that last one I placed won't work, so I'm just going to jump back to frame 1 and move it over here a bit. And then we can see, okay, we don't have any trackers that the character goes over, so we should be good to work with this. Perfect. So I'm just going to jump back to frame 1, select all my tracks, and we can leave this now. We can just jump back to our compositing tab. So in our compositing tab now, you can see this is what the results we were getting with our solid key color. But if I go Shift A and add in a keying screen, we can grab our footage there, change it to the green screen object we added. And if we go Control Shift, click on this, you can see we have a gradient made up from our keying. Now we have a little bit of a weird color going on down here, and we can just do a little bit of adjustments to actually fix this. So I'm going to jump back to our motion tracking tab. And I want to open this up so we can see it updating in real time up here. So I'm going to switch this to my node editor right here. And we'll switch it to the compositing tab and choose backdrop so we can actually see our keying screen in the background up here. I'll drop this down a little bit lower. And then I'll just pull this down real quick here by pulling those two down. And so you can see the gradient we're making up here if I zoom out a little bit. And you can see we have a little bit of a weird bright light going on right here. And that's because of this marker here. So that's not going to work perfectly. So I can kind of adjust this, and you can see it update up here if I do this. If I just move these off that, you can see we're kind of tweaking our green screen, and we have that. So I'm not going to worry about this, as our characters never really go over it. We can just use that as a mask, and it will get a better green screen result if we just don't bother with that. So if I put another one over here, you can see the results we get, and this just sets up a nice looking green screen. Now you can see with this tracker here that I just placed, if I was to scrub through the timeline and the character goes over it, you can see our green screen automatically adjusts for the color of that tracker, and it would throw off our track a bit. So that's why you want to keep all the tracks outside of the character's motion, so they never get, so we never mess up our background basically. So let me just place that somewhere where the character never goes, and we should be able to scrub through here and see. Whoop! I didn't move that right. I'm just going to delete that one actually, and I'll add a new one up here. And you can see that we have a pretty nice looking gradient here where our characters never go, and that will work well for keying. The more you place, the more updated your gradient will get, but I'm going to leave it at that for now, and we can do some green screening now. If I scrub through here, you can see that none of the trackers ever touch the characters, and the green screen stays a nice consistent color. Perfect. So with that done, we can go back to our compositing, and we can see the different results now. If I look at my color key, we only have this much chrome mode, but if I connect the keying screen to the key color, we have all that chrome mode. So it really saves a lot of time and makes a much more accurate keying screen. Now I'm going to adjust the hue saturation values here a little bit to choke up on this a little bit more as I go here. You can kind of cut some of the bulk of the green out. It's not going to give you a great track, and that's why I'm going to use multiple keying screens on this to get the best results, but you can kind of cut away the bulk amount of green with this node. So if I scrub through my timeline over here, you can see as it updates that our green screen looks pretty good. It's obviously not finished yet, it's just a rough mask, but this works to cut the bulk of the green out of our scene. So let's make this green screen a bit cleaner looking now with another node. So this one is going to be Shift A, and we're going to add in the matte, the keying node. So this is kind of the most powerful keying screen here, and this is going to work to really perfect our green screen here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this node and I'm going to plug it into the garbage matte. So that's going to just take out a big chunk of the image, and then we connect the image to our image tab on the keying screen. So if I go to this, we can see that, well, first off, it's not looking great, and that's because I need to invert this keying screen. Oh, actually, no, I just need to take the matte, I'm sorry, as the garbage matte, and then invert it. So color, invert, there we go. So we have the matte being used as a garbage matte on our keying screen, and now we're going to do some perfecting on this this setup. So I'm just going to kind of go through these settings now from top to bottom and tell you what I used and kind of give you an idea of what they will do for your scene. So first, the pre-blur is kind of blurring your scene a little bit before it calculates the key, and I found this actually gave a little bit of a cleaner result You can see I have it set to 3 here. If I turn it up a little bit, you can see the edges just get a little bit smoother on your object usually, and it's a little bit less of a rough cut. So I like to give this about a 5 or 6 on the pre-blur. So we'll start with that, and then the next thing is the screen balance. And this is going to have to be set right around a 0.7 or so is what I used in my scene. If you pull it down too much, you start cutting into your characters a little bit more than you want. So don't go below 0.5 and keep it around a 0.7. Again, this is going to change a little bit though for every scene. Now the despill factor and balance here, this is kind of for taking away the green color that is reflected onto your characters, and it actually works really well. You can see if I turn this down, you have all this green on your character, and this basically just takes the green values and changes the color, changes the hue of them, and makes it match the rest of the scene. So you can see you want to leave this all the way up as it's doing a great job of just removing the green around the edges of your character. And then the balance is kind of the shadows of the green. If I turn this all the way up, you see we have quite a bit of green on our characters. But if I pull it down, you see it kind of gets rid of that green. You don't want to go too far again because too much of a good thing is a bad thing. But we'll leave this right around a 0.3, 0.4. Now the edge kernel radius and tolerance, these settings are for basically cutting away the edges just like they say. They don't really do that much difference in most cases, so I'm just going to leave it at about a 4 and a 0.4, and we can tweak these later if we need to, but for now that's going to just be fine. Now the clip black and white, this is kind of used for cutting down on the green screen a little bit. This is kind of the tolerance, I guess you could say. So if you pull the white down, you can see we don't really get too much of a difference in this case. Let's look at a different character and see if we get any results. Yeah, over here you can see pulling it down actually kind of gives a little bit more info into our character. Sometimes changing to the matte here will allow you to see what's being cut out better. And if you pull the white down, you can see that the white is being removed from our scene, and that's exactly what we want. We want to take it away from Nebula being cut out right there. So I'm going to leave this around a 0.27, and then I'm going to give it just a little bit of a clip black here. Not too much, because that's kind of making that worse. And then we can try and adjust our screen balance to try and get that spot out of there. Maybe take it down to about 0.5, as it's helping in this case. And then the last one is the feather distance. So this is going to basically do what it says. It's going to feather your screen, but I don't like to go in a positive number, because if I take a look at this, you can see we suddenly get the green being feathered there. So I like to give this just a little bit of a negative number, going down to about a -3 or 4, and it just kind of gives a nice sort of fadey edge a little bit, especially if there's motion involved in your characters. It will work really well. So a little bit of that, and a little bit of post blur as well helps to give a better key. So I'll take this down to about a -0.5, leave that about a 0.2, and then the feather fall off, you can sometimes get better results playing around with this. For example, I think inverse square actually cut down a little bit more of the green for me, and was more of what I was looking for. You can see the default one is this, and sometimes giving it a little bit more will cut down just a little bit more of the right stuff for whatever scene you're working on. But now we're going to have to tweak things a little bit just to kind of get rid of where it's cutting through areas that we don't want it to, like down here on Nebula. So I'm going to change the screen balance here a little bit, see if we can't get a little bit better results down there. Now maybe it's not even being caused by this, maybe it's the color key doing this. Yep, it is. So that means we have to adjust our color key first. You want to make sure that your color key isn't affecting your scene that much. It's basically just to take out the bulk of it, but you don't want it to touch the characters. So to cut out some of this remaining sort of green in here, I'm going to just take the saturation up a little bit on my keying screen, and that'll do a pretty good job of cutting most of it away, leaving us with some better looking results here. And you can tweak this back as much as you need, but as long as it's right about there, I think that's going to be pretty good. We've got a little bit up on the head there, so you might have to take a little bit more out up there. And we're just going to kind of play with these settings, so we're not touching the character, but we are taking out the bulk of the green. So after some tweaking, the final settings that you kind of want to settle on for this scene probably is about a 1.9, and our hue values here, whoops, not a whole one, a 0.19. And then about a 0.28 and a 0.25 I found looked pretty good. You still have a little bit of problems over here, and this is where the masking is going to come in, because obviously this is an object that won't be removed, and you have to do a little bit of masking. Same thing with the markers. But for the most part, the screen is looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit more blur effects on the pre-screen. And if you check out the matte now, you can see we have a pretty solid matte with not much character being destroyed anywhere or anything. And if you want to continue tweaking these values, of course you can. Maybe taking the clip of white down a little bit, can sometimes help a little bit in this scene. But if we kind of scrub through here, we can see we don't have any major issues. A little bit on Drax here, so you might have to tweak one of these values just a tad. If you hold shift, you move a little bit less, and you can see that it's not really that value, so we'll leave that. And this one cleans it up a little bit, so we'll pull this down a little bit to clean up Drax a little bit there. But otherwise, it's looking pretty good, and we're ready for some masking. So the masking is going to be the kind of tedious part where you want to avoid it as much as possible, but it's always kind of necessary. So to do the masking, we're going to switch over to our motion tracking tab here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We have our compositor up here, which is fine because we'll be actually using that, and we have our masking tab down here. So we're going to change from tracking to mask. And for this, we're going to want to make a new mask. So I'm just going to click new, and we'll start with a simple mask. So we'll do Drax. Just type in Drax right there. And to add a mask, all it's going to be is just like when you're adding a tracker, it's control and left click. But if you click and you drag, you can pull out your hand a little bit here, and this will give it a little bit more control for animating. So actually, I want to quick delete that though, because I should start on frame 1. And I'm also going to turn on the automatic keyframe insertion right here, because we're going to have to animate these masks if we want to have an animated scene. And so doing this will automatically add keyframes every time we tweak the mask. So before getting into animating our mask, I'm going to first hide the tracker markers here, as they might be a little distracting. So you can just go to tracking, hit A to grab them all, and hit H to hide them, and then back into our mask settings. So we can collapse this. We can actually, well, we'll leave this open for now. But with our Drax, we're going to go hit Control and left click to pull out our mask layer. Now I can see I somehow made 2 mask layers over here. I'm just going to delete one. And then I'm going to continue with our mask, clicking and dragging our handles out. This one might be a little bit closer than I needed to, so I can actually pull it out a little bit and then click again. We only really need about 5 handles or something for an object like this. And just like anything in Blender, you can grab it, you can rotate it, and you can scale it. So we're just going to do a real basic mask. I'm going to click over here. Whoops, you want to make sure you have the right point selected. Click right there. We'll put one down here. And then I'm just going to go Alt-C, and that will close it up. So you can see I can scale this one a little bit then to make it fit around his leg there. And we have a nice box mask around him. So if we want to see this in action, what I could do real quick before we do any animating is pull this down a little bit. I should really just close off this timeline. There we go. And I can open up that mask right here. So we have our keying screen. I'm going to drop it in right underneath our keying screen. So we're going to go Input, Mask. We're going to choose Drax. And I'm just going to go adding in a color mix. We'll change this to screen, and then we can plug it right in to our garbage mat on our keying screen here. So I'm just going to drop it in right here, and I'm going to add this mask to it in the bottom. And you can see that he's gone. That's because it's opposite, so we need to drop a invert node in. And you can see we have Drax and nothing else because we haven't done any of the other masks, but he's there and he's perfectly clean with no markers or anything around him. Perfect. You can also choose motion blur, which will give you a little bit of motion blur between the animating frames. In this case, it's not really necessary because this is just a box mask, but if you're doing a closer mask, you can get better results using motion blur. But otherwise, we can leave these settings as it is, and we can do a little bit of animating real quick here to show you guys how you can animate the mask. So with everything selected, I'm going to grab it and just click, and with the automatic keyframe insertion on, we have a keyframe right here. You can see with the little line right there. And I'm just going to move every 5 frames or so, and then move the mask with it. So I can just pull it down a little bit, and you can see we have a little bit of a marker coming through right here. So I might need to tighten this one up right around the arm there to get rid of that marker. And that's it. If I scrub through, you can see the mask moves with Drax here, and we get that little marker covered up as soon as it's visible. So we'll just move ahead another 10 frames and tweak our mask some more. We're just going to pull this, Option H. If you hit H, you hide it, so you want to hit G instead of H. And then I'm just going to pull it down. Pull this one out, and just kind of keep it up close around him. Perfect. We can move on another 5 frames or so. Here we have him hitting the ground. So I'm just going to, not hit H. I'm going to hit G, and we'll place this right at the base of his foot here. Just grabbing it, pulling it into the corner there. Want to hit rotate to kind of get rid of that mask and just have his foot sitting right on the ground there. That will work. We'll pull this one down here. And that looks pretty good. I think we can move forward another 5 frames. Right about there. Here we're going to have to pull this out now. And we can rotate it. I'm just keeping out the green here because that's not keying very well. So I'm just going to not worry about it, and I'm going to keep it in the mask, or outside of the mask I should say, as that will make it work perfectly. We don't have to worry about Nebula because she's going to be in the scene anyway, so it's okay that she's visible there in our scene. And I'm going to scale it down a little bit. And we can move forward another 5. So I'm not going to show you guys how to animate all of them. Just this one as it's the example. And then I'll go ahead and do the other ones off screen. But this is how you do the basic character masking, moving frame by frame and moving the mask with them. But actually, I'm not moving frame by frame. I guess I'm moving about every 5 frames. And that is just keyframe between them. And you will have to come back and tweak it sometimes. But for the most part, this seems to be working where I don't have to actually tweak the in-between keyframes at all. It's just working well to match our character, moving every 5 frames. It does help that this scene is kind of slow motion, but it's better for us because it's easier. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab this one, pull it down to about the bottom there, about so, making sure he's in there, and pulling this down as well. So the other thing I want to show you guys in the mask editor here is you can actually feather your mask manually too if you need to adjust the feather for it in an area where you might need a blurred mask. So to do this, it's just shift and right clicking, and you can pull out a feather on your mask. And then if you need to tweak it in certain areas, you can just left click and pull that handle in. And so this is going to work to kind of give it more mask or more feather in a certain area and less in another. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, if I jump to my mask here, you can see we have the feather, and we can increase how soft it is in different areas. So you can see Blender has some really powerful tools for masking as well as tracking and chroma keying. But in this case, I don't need the feather, so I'm just going to delete it, and we'll move on with a little bit more masking real quick. So we can see now that we have our mask set up for Drax, and if I scrub through my timeline here, he's nice and cut out the whole time, and that's working perfectly. But the one thing I want to show you guys is we're going to need another mask for Nebula over here. And you can see this one's going to have to be a little bit more detailed as we have the arm and hand. So I'm going to show you guys quickly how to initially set up this mask. And then I'm going to go ahead and animate it or grab an animated version already so I don't have to show you guys the whole process again. So for this, we're going to create a new mask. So I'm going to hit plus. We'll just call it Neb. And I'm going to add in the box basic mask just like Drax. So for this, it's just going to be clicking, dragging, same thing like before, keeping the trackers out of the mask. Grabbing that one. And this is just going to be a really rough mask. And I'm just going to leave her arm completely cut off, and as well as this light here. So we're just going to use a handful of markers here. That should be all we need. And then I'm going to grab the last one and go Alt-C to connect it. And that's pretty much all we need right there. But for the arm here, I'm going to have to add another mask. And to do this, I'm going to use a mask layer to keep it nice and organized. I'm going to hit plus right there. We can just call this one arm. And to do this, I'm just going to add another mask now. But this one's going to be smaller and more detailed, as we need a few points for around her arm and the side of her body here, really, as this comes into screen. So I'm just going to pull these out, going around the hand here, making sure I have enough markers to accurately follow along. A few up here, around her thumb there. Look at that detail. Perfect. We can kind of pull this out a little bit. And then I'll put one down here. Maybe I want one in the middle here, actually, at the point. So I'll pull this down, scale it down a little bit. This one's going to have to be scaled down as well. Pulled back. So as you can see, this is how you get a little bit more of a detail mask going on. And then I'm going to put this one up here, along the arm. We'll go one more up here, because actually I think her head comes into it too, so you would need a few up here for later on. These don't have to be perfect right now, because it's not connecting anything. So we just put one right there, and then we come down here with our mask. Whoops, I should be pulling this out a little bit. Yep, like that. Then we come down here, and then we can connect it with maybe one more right there, and then Alt-C. So we have that mask connected. And now if you look at this mask in here, I'm just going to duplicate this mask. I'll change this one to Neb. Then I can just duplicate this screwing node up here, put it right before the invert node, and then connect it to our new mask. And you can see that we have both Neb and Drax, and that arm is actually perfectly cut out due to our mask. So that's how you do some masking, and if you were going to animate it, you'd have to go through all the frames, just like I did. But instead, I'm just going to grab a version where I already have it animated, and we can follow up with the rest of this video, putting a backplate on here and a little bit of compositing effects to make them match a little bit better. And then we'll be done with this, this green screen comp, and you'll have created your own Avengers scene in Blender. Okay, so here we have the masks finished now. I have Peter added here, and I have Nebula animated all the way through the end. As you can see here, if I jump to one of these, we have just our basic box mask animated to follow Peter. And if I jump to Nebula here, right up here, you can see that we have the arm there animated as well, following her arm like it does. It doesn't look perfect, but it actually looks pretty good once it's on the character. So here we have it, and we're ready to start adding a backdrop. Actually, I see a little bit of an error right here. We see some tracker marker right there. So we can quick fix that by jumping over to our motion tracking, making sure we have that footage pulled up here, going to mask, and grabbing Peter. So right there you can see is the problem. The tracker is in the scene. So you just grab this marker here with the automatic keyframing on. You would pull it over that marker right about so. And that would be it. You can see that it's now fixed. And we scale it up a little bit. Actually, we could do it even better right there. And then it's perfect. So if we go to compositing now, and I scrub through here, you can see that that's gone. So there's going to be a little bit of tweaking that you guys have to do as you find errors, but that's how you fix it up. So now let's add a background. So I'm going to add just an image and open it up. Again, this is available in the downloads below, but this is just a shot of the red planet in the movie that is that I masked out one of the characters actually, so we have just a blank background plate of a cool planet here. So it's a little bit blurred actually because it was a moving shot. I did a little bit of sharpening on it, and you can see still a little blurred, but that's okay because we can actually kind of blur our characters a little bit to match the camera blur in the scene. Okay, so to put this in the background, first we're just going to add in a converter or color alpha over. Drop it right in there, and we're going to plug the background into the top and this image into the bottom. And you can see, voila, we have a background. But there's a little bit of an issue, and you can see some of the green screen playing a problem here. So to fix that, all you have to do is choose Convert Pre-Multiply, and that just cuts out the little bit of whatever you were seeing there, and it cleans up the image. So you want to start by doing that. And then what I like to do is I like to scale the background to fit the image size here. So to do that, it's going to be just a scale node. So I'm going to pull this up here. I'm going to go Shift A, add in a distort scale node. I like to leave one with the relative here so we can change the overall scale. And then after that, I'm going to put one just to scale it to the render size. I'm going to want it to crop to the render size so we have it the right aspect ratio there. And now you can adjust the background scale with this. I'm going to actually take it down to a 0.9 so it's a little bit smaller in the background, and that just kind of fits the scale I thought a little bit better. And that is that. So we have our background, but as you can tell, it's not looking great because of the blur. Our character is a little bit too sharp in front of the blurred background. So we're just going to drop in a directional blur node between the king and the alpha over node here to blur our characters a little bit, because as you can see here, they're a little too sharp. So I'm going to go Shift A, and I'm going to add a filter and directional blur. Drop that in right there. I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see the settings a little bit better that we use. And to do this, I'm just going to first give it about 8 iterations. This is like the quality of the blur, basically. So I'm going to give it 8, so it's a nicer, higher quality blur. We can turn wrap on. I don't know if it really makes much difference in this, but we'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to give it just a little bit of a distance. So I'm going to give it about a 0.004, as too much goes a long way. But you can see right after doing that, we have some motion blur on our characters. Now this is good, but I want to change the angle a little bit to make it look like the blowing, maybe jumping upwards a little bit in the blur. So I'm going to change the angle here, and we'll make it about 105 degrees, I found, to look pretty good. And that just kind of blurs them in the right direction, I feel, for the scene a little bit better. And then we can kind of offset the center of the directional blur. So I'm going to take the Y down to about a point, or up to about a 0.8, I'm sorry. And that just kind of gives us the better positioning for the blur when we add a little bit of zoom blur as well. So I'm going to add a little bit of zoom blur, about a 0.01. If we do that, you can see that our characters are kind of blurred a little bit more, kind of blurred towards you a little bit. And I think that just looks a little bit better. Now this might be a little bit more blur than you want. If so, you could just take the distance down a little bit here, maybe about 0.003, and get a little bit of a sharper character, but a little bit of blur adds some more realism to it, especially when there's motion involved, and I think that looks a bit better. So next up is color grading. We need to do a little bit of color grading to make this match the background image, and it really helps a lot just to tweak the colors a little bit in a case like this. So I'm going to drop in a basic color balance node right here, and we're going to first give the highlights, which is more of this end here, the gain, a little bit of a yellow hue. As you can see, like Drax doesn't really have too much yellow on him, but the sun here is yellow, so it would look better if he had a little bit of yellow on him. So I'm going to give the highlights some yellow. And if I click that, you can see right away it looks better. Not maybe quite that much, a little bit less, pull it back, but a little bit obviously helps right off the bat. And we can do a little bit of the same here in the gamma. Now the last thing is the blacks look just a little bit too black in certain areas, like here, and it doesn't match the background. So cranking the blacks up just a tiny bit in brightness can make that match a little bit better. Not even that much, but just a tiny bit can make the blacks look better. And so something like that looks much better, I think. So that's about it. You can bring the highlights up a little bit too, if you want to bring it up a little bit for the light there. But overall, I think that looks pretty good, and we have a much nicer looking composite there. So getting to the end of it, that's about it. The last thing is, if you want to add something like an explosion to kind of separate these characters from the background and give them more of a purpose for jumping like this, you can do that by adding in an image over our background image. So I'm going to show you how to do this real quick, just for fun. You wouldn't really use it in an animated shot because you'd have to simulate something, but I'm just going to use an image to show you guys how you would composite it in Blender. So I'm going to go ahead and go Shift A, add in an image, and we're going to open up the last image I have included here, and this is just a fireball from Google Images, and you can see there's actually a character in it, but that doesn't matter because we're going to not be taking any of the shadows basically, we're only taking the highlights. So I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to add it to our background image. So I'm going to go Color, Mix, we'll drop it right in there, and I'm going to change it to Add. We'll take this image, and we'll drop it right in the bottom here, and if I go to that, you can see we have our fireball right there. That's good, but it obviously needs to be scaled a little bit, and it's a little bit, you're seeing too much colors that you don't want to see. So we need to drop a color balance on it so we can tweak the colors a little bit. So I'm going to go Shift A, Color, Color Balance. Now this will allow us to change the colors enough, take down like the mids and the shadows, so we only have the light that we want. And then you can see that character that was in that scene kind of immediately got removed. And you can turn the brightness up just a little bit. Alright, now we need to scale it to fit our render size. So I'm going to go ahead and do just like before, scale, set it to render size, and voila, a nice big fireball back there. And it also looks better if you turn the add factor here to about a 1.1, so it's a little bit more intense. And we can choose clamp there too. We don't really need it in this case, but just in case we can do that. And then the last thing is tweaking the scale a little bit. So we can duplicate this scale node one more time, and we'll change it to relative, so we can kind of make it maybe a little bit bigger than it is right now by cranking this up just a little bit, and maybe even scaling it a little bit along the x-axis or y-axis to make it seem longer, more the shape we might want, something like that. Okay, perfect. Now if you want to move this around, it's one more node, and that's a translate node. You drop that in there, and you can kind of position it exactly the way you want it now. You could even do some animating on this if you wanted, but just kind of finding where you want it, move it around, get in the position right like so. And then if you look at it combined with your characters, we jump here, and boom, we have our characters being burst from this fireball over the green screen plate. And it looks actually pretty good. You could do a little bit of color adjustments on this fireball if you wanted to, make it a little bit more intense, change the colors a little bit, of course. But I thought it was just kind of fun to add something else to the scene, show you guys how you can drop anything in the background there, and it would look pretty cool. But that's going to do it, guys. That is it for our green screen Hollywood effects, all done within Blender. So you can create your own Hollywood movie now with this knowledge, and hopefully you guys learned something, had some fun. I thought this was a pretty fun project, so I want to share it with you guys. And yeah, that's going to do it for me, guys. So you can make this an animation if you wanted to go through the work of maybe simulating a rocket back here, or just turning that off completely, because you don't necessarily need it for this scene. But if you want to have something, you can put an animated explosion back there or something. And it's already animated with our characters moving. And if you, like I said at the beginning, if you were going to track a scene, what you could do is you could track it with these markers just to get the camera motion, and then have that in there as well. Obviously, I don't really need it for this scene because there's not really any camera motion in this shot. But yeah, that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know if you have any issues with the tutorial, and someone can help you down in the comment section. But that's going to do it. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!